All right. Okay. Here we are. Here we go. Welcome, everybody, to Ask Abhijit episode 278. I hope everybody is doing fantastic. Let us see who all is there on the live chat with us on this live stream. I can see Dhairya Raj Rawal, Prajwal Gupta, Nishad Athalie, Boston Bread, Anonymous Scientist, bonjour, Avinash, hello, Vikash PJ, Ayush Singh, Jay Guman, Samar Tripathi, miscellaneous, Dhairya Raj Rawal, Avinash, Geopolitical Dubai from Indore, good evening, sir, Sagar Thora, Jai Shri Krishna, Aditya Vimal, hello, Boston Bread again, Nishad Athalie, Yuvraj Singh Shekhawat, Shri Ramchandraya Namaha, Radhe Radhe, Avisha Mishra, hello, ma'am, धैर्य राज प्रज्वल गुप्ता ग्रेविटी कहाँ है एच बी नमस्कार मिसलेनियस नबरिता दास शिव साई युवराज सिंह शेखावत सागर थोरा ज्ञानेश्वर राजू आदित्य आशीष राज सिड के आयुष्मान माथुर धैर्य राज अविनाश उमा महेश्वरी गुड इवनिंग ध्रुव धुरिया हेलो आदित्य विमल हेलो Happy Janmashtami to everybody. Really now, patriotic, Yuvraj Singh Shekhawat, Shivani Maheshwari, Akhil Pathak, Negro Aryan Patel from Philly, Dhairyaraj, Polar Bear. Who else do we have? Krishna Raghunath from the Surinamese Netherlands, MK, Mr. Saxena, Sai Teja, Soham Kulkarni, Stark, Tanmay, Akhil Pathak, Ayush again, Patriotic, Vikash PJ, Nimish Gupta, Siddharth, MK, Rohan Suneja. Yes, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Chaitanya Ajabale, Stark, Savaria Seth, Harsh Dubey, Happy Janmashtami, Ashu Gautam, Tanmay Aninda Bhattacharji, Sagar Thorat, McLovin from Hawaii, Shiraz Tijani, Naresh, says good evening and RIP to your hip flexors sitting 8 hours a day. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Rohan Suneja, Aryavart, Khash, Kedar Bhatt, Tanmay Siddharth, Agniva Rana, Summer Afternoon, Animesh Paul, Dheri Raj, Sigma Realm, and so many other people. All right, good to see you all. Thank you so much for being on the live chat. I'm going to take history questions today. Napoleon Singh Shekhawat. Well, hello. So I'll take history questions today, a bunch of history questions. History questions are always super diverse, lots of questions. I am only able to take a few of selected 25, 26 questions. That's about it. And we'll take as many as possible. Before we go into that, I will take one geopolitics question because it's super relevant, super important. Lots of people have asked about Putin and Trump. Their meeting, what's the outcome? What does it mean? So you see, geopolitics, today's geopolitics is tomorrow's history, and yesterday's geopolitics is today's history. So it's all interconnected. So let's take one question, one geopolitical topic, and I'll not put questions on the screen because plenty of people have asked that. Before that, somebody is Aditya is saying, "How do you sit 8 hours a day in one go?" Any suggestions? You've got to take care of your fitness and your health, and then only you can have the stamina to sit for 8 hours a day. And it's something you develop over time. It's not something you can just start doing from day one. It takes time. It takes a lifetime of experience and practice to do that, to be able to pull that off. And you need to be reasonably fit as a human being and flexible and all that to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's going to mess up your entire posterior chain, anterior chain, everything. So you've got to take care. You've got to take the precautions. Only then you can pull it off, right? So take care of your fitness, stamina, health, food, flexibility, all of that, and build up the stamina for sitting and working at a stretch. Start with 1 hour and then you can increase it. All right, now what am I saying? Napoleon? No, Putin and Trump. What's the deal? The two gentlemen, the two leaders met yesterday in Alaska. What's the outcome of that? Did it achieve something, this meeting, right? So let's focus on the substance. Let's forget about the optics. We saw a lot of optics, right? I mean, what's the optics that we witnessed? Oh, all the symbolism, the location, which is Alaska, then Putin coming in, Trump doing that fancy handshake of his, in which he pulls the guy's hand towards himself and then pats his back of the hand that way. That symbolism, the red carpet drawn out for Mr. Putin, the two leaders sitting in Trump's limousine, the fighter jets flanking the limousine's path, the B-2 bomber flanked by fighter jets that flew over Mr. Putin when he met with Mr. Trump, all of that. That's symbolism, right? That's a show of force by the US. The US President, Mr. Trump, decided to do a show of force. It's an attempt to, what's a show of force? A show of force is an attempt to either impress or intimidate somebody. When do you do a show of force? When do you feel the need to show some force? You feel that need when you're actually in a position of weakness, right? So a show of force is an attempt to compensate for some weakness, to hide your weakness. Do you think Mr. Putin was impressed by the show of force? Do you think so? Yeah. Mr. Putin has met with every single US president in more than the past quarter century. He's met them dozens of times. He knows what US presidents are like. He's not going to be impressed with the show of force. He himself has plenty of force. He has more than 5,000 nuclear warheads and God knows what else. It's not going to impress him, right? If in case Mr. Trump were to visit Moscow to meet with Mr. Putin, do you think Putin will show off his weaponry and all that? He won't do that. When you are powerful, you don't feel the need to demonstrate force. You keep it implicit. That's what makes it stronger and more powerful. So that's the symbolism. Let's forget about the symbolism. Let's focus on the substance. The two leaders met. They had substantial talks with their entourage, 2.5 hours plus. That's what one hears, right? And then there was, after that, an address by both leaders. First by Mr. Putin, then by Mr. Trump. And if you see the body language and all of that, that is not symbolism. That is more substance. It indicates what happened, the dynamics between the two sides and the two leaders. Mr. Putin looked super comfortable. He looked good. Mr. Trump looked a little nervous. Just the body language. See, the thing is, in this negotiation that happened, both sides wanted something. That's why this happened, right? What is it that Mr. Trump wanted? What's the minimum that Mr. Trump wanted? I think he said what he wanted. He said that he will be very disappointed if there is no deal at all or no ceasefire. That's what he said. What happened? So the minimum expectation from Mr. Trump's side was at least some form of ceasefire, maybe a temporary ceasefire so that negotiations can go forward. Was there a ceasefire agreed upon? Absolutely nothing. Even the minimum expectation that Mr. Trump had did not materialize. You see, because both sides were negotiating from different positions. One from a position of strength, one from a position of weakness. Who was in a position of weakness? Who was in a position of strength? The side with the territorial advantage and the upper hand in the Ukraine war is in a position of strength. That is Mr. Putin. Mr. Trump is under pressure. He has unleashed a war of tariffs on the world. It's biting him back because it's biting the US public. They are having to pay the tariffs. It's not the other nations that are paying the tariffs. It's the US population, the public, that's paying the tariffs. It's going to make him increasingly unpopular. Secondly, he has made promises that he has not been able to keep, Mr. Trump. He said, on day one of my presidency, I will end the Ukraine war. Well, what happened? So he's desperate to have at least a ceasefire. So Trump was bargaining, negotiating from a position of weakness. Putin was negotiating from a position of strength. And then, clearly, there was no agreement, there was no deal. And Mr. Trump had said before this summit happened that he will be very disappointed if there is no deal, if there's no ceasefire. Well, he did not get any deal, any ceasefire. And in the address that both leaders gave to the media, both leaders spoke. First Mr. Putin, then Mr. Trump. And Mr. Putin made his red lines abundantly clear. He said that Europe and the West must respect Russia's red lines. And he made those red lines abundantly clear. The red lines are Russia's national interests. And Europe's security position has to take into account Russia's national interests and Russia's security position. Right? And he said, and so on. So he made his position abundantly clear. I don't know what Mr. Trump really said. His address did not really have much substance. And then Mr. Putin said that, the next meeting will be in Moscow. And Mr. Trump said, yeah, maybe that can happen, that sort of thing. So maybe this is just the first meeting in a long series of meetings. Mr. Zelensky obviously wasn't invited because we know how it goes when Mr. Zelensky is there. And Mr. Zelensky and the EU are essentially the roadblock, the obstacle in the way of any kind of ceasefire. Well, all Mr. Trump has to do if he wants a ceasefire is to stop funding the war. That's it. So anyhow, nothing has emerged out of this summit. Nothing has happened. Mr. Putin, I think he came back stronger. He came back as the winner. He came back as somebody who rebuffed Mr. Trump's, desire to reach some kind of deal to get a ceasefire out of Mr. Putin. Did not happen. He did not give Mr. Trump what he wanted. And Mr. Putin, I'm sure, must have made demands that Trump obviously can't fulfill, or maybe he wants to fulfill them, but he is facing various kinds of problems, obstacles. Mr. Trump wants to gain access to the minerals of Ukraine and all that. So both leaders have something to gain. But Mr. Putin is perfectly willing to play the long game, as we know very well. You understand? He's been playing the long game ever since the war started. The slow war strategy, long war strategy, frozen conflict strategy. The longer it drags, the longer it goes on, the more the West has to pay the price. And the longer there's no ceasefire, the more pressure Mr. Trump will face. Mr. Putin, it suits him very well. He is perfectly happy to be patient. So that's where we are. Trump is in a hurry. Putin is in no hurry at all. So it's advantage Putin right now. And Russia's war economy, like they say, it's doing really well. So that's where we are. No outcome. Advantage Russia, advantage Mr. Putin. Mr. Lavrov came wearing a CCCP t-shirt. Very, very cheeky of him. So that's where we are. All right, that's my update about the Ukraine conflict and the Trump-Putin summit. There was mention of tariffs and all, and Mr. Trump has said that, okay, since we are negotiating, I will not impose further tariffs on nations that are purchasing Russian oil. I think the tariffs that Trump has imposed on India are an attempt to pressurize Mr. Putin, to pressurize Russia. Because if he puts India in a position where India may have to rethink its purchases of Russian oil, that puts the Russian economy under stress. So it's all interconnected. Anyhow, that's how it's gone. Now let's take some questions that I've selected from the comments. Where do we begin? Harsha says, believe it or not, our channel, Your Problems of India, which are the need of the hour, which have been echoing over the years, have somehow reached the top level. We can hear from Prime Minister himself. Only to look forward our actions, as you say. Godspeed, Jai Hindustan. Yeah, Mr. Modi, during his 15th of August speech, he did mention many of the topics that I've been speaking about. I've been really speaking about for the past few years, haven't I? Illegal immigration, that's one issue that I have been speaking about. I've been speaking about the need to become technologically more sovereign, the need to develop our own jet engines, all of that. Technological sovereignty, military sovereignty, all of that. So many of the topics that I've been speaking about, I think Mr. Modi spoke about them, especially illegal immigration, the demographic initiative that is starting, all of that. So it's good to see that. I would not give myself the credit that because of me, Mr. Modi has heard about it. No, obviously he's the leader of the country. He knows these better than me or better than anybody else. And I'm glad that this is being addressed now. So I'm really glad to see that. But we have to see how this translates into actions, and we will wait and watch for that. Now, Malik Sayed says, I am 19. I was 15 when I first saw you in a podcast in which you had indeed said that this decade is a decade of changes, in which changes will happen on a weekly basis. I was naive to understand that back then, what you told us, but now I fully understand, and I'm aware of what you had said came to be true. So can you expand on this? Well, thank you, first of all, Malik Sayed. I really appreciate your kind words and the fact that you've been watching me for so long. So I have been saying this. I mean, the first geopolitical podcast I did was probably in the year 2021, when in India nobody used the term geopolitics. At that time, everybody was a strategic affairs expert, and the topic was called strategic affairs. And I went on the Beer Biceps podcast with Ranveer Alabadia, and I discussed geopolitics. And somehow that term caught on. Now everybody is a geopolitics expert. That's fine. That's good. So it's, I think, in that first podcast that I had said that there are times when nothing happens for a century. No change happens for a century. And then there are periods of history where decades of change happen in just weeks or months or years. Decades worth of changes. And I had said that the 2020s is going to be that sort of decade where decades worth of change, the change that you typically see over decades, will happen in weeks or months. And we are seeing that. Right? So how do I expand upon this? Right? You want me to expand upon this? So you can expand upon this by, well, giving historical precedents. there have been multiple periods in history where tremendously vast, broad, and deep changes have happened in short periods of time, right? I mean, let's look at the past 1000 years only, for example. The year 1066, the Norman conquest of England happened overnight, all of a sudden, happened out of nowhere. The English king, Harold Godwinson, he was in the north of England fighting off his brother who had allied with a Danish king called Harald Hardrad. And after a tremendous battle, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in which the English king won, it was an exhausting battle. The English king won. He had to kill his brother and his brother's ally, King Harald Hardrada of Denmark. And the moment the battle is over, he hears word that William of Normandy has just landed on the southern shore of England. So he has to go all the way from north of England all the way to the south of England and fight the Battle of Hastings, which he loses because of bad luck. He got an arrow in the eye. And William the Conqueror, who was William of Normandy, who until then was called William the Bastard because he was illegitimate, he suddenly transformed into William the Conqueror. And so much changed in a matter of weeks and months in England. The entire old system disappeared. The Anglo-Saxon, the Saxon system of governance, the Saxon rule, the Saxon nobility, everything evaporated overnight, and the Normans took over. And it was a tremendous change in England. And it had wide-ranging repercussions for the whole of Europe eventually. Right? So that's 1066. Tremendous change in a matter of weeks and months. 1258, Baghdad, the fall of Baghdad. It fell to the Mongols. It fell to Hulagu Khan, I think great-grandson of Shri Chinggis Khan. So at that time, the Islamic world was at its pinnacle. It was the pinnacle of the golden age of Islam. And the center of the Islamic world was Baghdad. And they had these libraries and universities, one library and university and whatnot, and in which they had amassed a great amount of wisdom and knowledge, mostly from India: science, mathematics, pharmacology, toxicology, astronomy, mathematics, so much more. And that had given rise to this efflorescence of culture, of art, all of that in the Islamic world, right? And Baghdad was the center of that. Baghdad was the seat of the caliphate. And Hulagu Khan, the Mongol, the great grandson or grandson, I think whatever it is, of Shri Chinggis Khan. And he besieges Baghdad. In 1258, he sacks Baghdad, puts the city to the sword and the torch, destroys everything. And overnight, the Islamic world changed. The golden age was over like that. And the Islamic world turned inwards. And it was a seismic event in the Islamic world. Nothing was the same ever again. So that is another massive change. Then you have 1453, the end of the Byzantine Empire, the fall of Constantinople, which completely upended the geopolitics of that time in Europe. It suddenly turned the Turks into a massive force, and it all culminated with the siege of Vienna, when Suleiman the Magnificent took the Christian world by the throat. Of course, he did not succeed in taking Vienna, but that sort of thing. So the Ottoman Empire destroyed the Byzantine Empire, annihilated the Byzantine Empire. The Bosphorus Strait, this extremely vital set of choke points, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. So that flipped, the control of that flipped, right? And the trade routes completely were reshaped, the Eurasian trade routes, the great power dynamics changed, and that is what caused, that is what precipitated European efforts to find a different sea route to India, because earlier it used to go through the Byzantine Empire. And that's where Vasco da Gama, and before that Columbus and all, that's where they come into the picture. So that changed world history completely, right? Then you have World War I. That's another great example from the past century. The First World War. Essentially, everything changed in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. There's the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Then the Austro-Hungarian Empire issues an ultimatum to Serbia. And the ultimatum was designed in such a way that the Serbians can't accept it. So then, in a few days, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war. As a consequence, Germany declares war on Russia and France together, and Germany invades Belgium. And the moment Germany invades Belgium, Britain has to enter the war because Britain was the guarantor of security of Belgium. In a matter of like less than 2 weeks, all the dominoes fall, and the world is at, I mean, the Western world is at war. And obviously, it had ripple effects across the world, including India, right? Because Indian forces were the bulwark of the British armed forces, and so many more examples. So there are times in history. I've just given a few. There are so many more. The Bronze Age collapse and so much more. I mean, you can go on forever. So there are periods of time in history where so much change happens in a very compressed, condensed amount of time. And that's what I mean. And this is one of those time periods. We haven't seen major wars yet. The Ukraine war is a problem, yeah, obviously. But, the situation is such that major conflict could emerge anytime. There are multiple flashpoints in the world. So that's what I was talking about when I was talking about decades of changes happening in weeks or months. That's exactly what I was talking about. Hope that puts it into context. Now, let's take another question. Amisha says, what's the difference between an empire, a kingdom, and a dynasty? Right. So a dynasty is something that is pertinent to empires as well as kingdoms. So let's start with dynasties first. A dynasty is typically one family that rules for an extended period of time. So the father, let's say, starts a kingdom, becomes king, then his son takes over, then his grandson takes over, then great grandson, and there's a succession of kings all from the same lineage. That's a dynasty, right? In the US, you have the Bush dynasty. George Bush Sr., the president who won the presidency in 1998. 1988. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. 1988. And then George W. Bush, who won in 2004, I believe, all the way up to 2012, he was president. So that's one. There's the Clinton dynasty, and George Bush the Senior has another son who tried to be president, right? So that's a political dynasty. When it comes to kingdoms and empires, well, the Maurya Empire was an empire. It was also a dynasty because you have the empire starts with Chandragupta Maurya, then his son becomes king, becomes emperor after him, Bindusar. Then Bindusar's son, Ashok the Great, becomes king, emperor, and there's a whole list of kings all the way up to the last one who was assassinated by Pushyamitra Shung. So succession of kings, emperors, who are all from the same family, the same lineage. That's a dynasty. Another example is the Gupta Empire. Same. It starts with a king called Ghatotkacha in Magad. He was a small-time king. But then his successors, his son, grandson, they became greater and greater. And eventually you have someone like Samudragupta, who conquered the whole of the subcontinent. Then you have Kumaragupta, who was a great king. You have Chandragupta, and so some of these emperors, they went all the way to Bahalik, which is beyond Afghanistan, and so much more. You have the Cholas and so on. So it's family lineages. That's dynasties. Okay. So typically, a kingdom typically has one dynasty. Sometimes you have multiple dynasties, of course. Yeah. Right. So that's a dynasty. It's a lineage of rulers, all starting from one ancestor and going down from essentially from father to son, or in the same family. Now, what's a kingdom? A kingdom is a state that's ruled by a king. A state means a political entity with a defined geographical boundary that is ruled by one king. That's a kingdom. A kingdom typically doesn't have vassals. An empire is a massive kingdom, and the king is called the emperor in an empire. And in the difference between kingdoms and empires is that empires are vast. They cover huge geographical regions, and they typically project power way beyond their boundaries by making other kingdoms their vassals. The Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, these are examples. The Chola Empire, so many examples. Yeah, the Kushan Empire, the Roman Empire, the Egyptians, so many examples. These are empires. The US has vassals all over the place. That's an empire, right? South Korea is North Korea is a kingdom. They don't have vassals. It's just one unit, one family. That's a dynasty. Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, three in the same family, right? That's a dynasty, and that's one kingdom. They don't have any vassals. They are the vassals of China, more or less. So I hope that explains the difference between kingdom, empire, and dynasty. Right. Huku Bahadur Khadka says, how did the Nepalese identity forge? Was it based on the conquests of Shri Prithvi Narayan Shah? Or is it something that's a myth? Look, the Nepalese identity is not a myth. It is definitely a real thing. Now let's examine the history of Nepal. First of all, let's go to the map and just try and understand the geography before we get into the history. Because I'll tell you that the map explains a lot. So let's take a look at the map, and we're going to the northern part of India, Nepal, beyond the northern part of India, Kathmandu. So if you look at the geography of Nepal, I mean, it's not really visible here unless even if I put the satellite image, you may get a better idea perhaps. So you see the southern part of Nepal is called the Tarai region, the plains. And it's a pretty large region, and about half of Nepal's population lives in the Tarai region. And the people who live in the Tarai region of Nepal are essentially more or less identical as the people of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Same people. Then you have the Pahad region, the hills of Nepal, which is the major part of Nepal. And that's where mainly the Pahadi people, the Gorkha people live. Kathmandu is the center, obviously the capital. And that's where the political power lies in Nepal, in the Pahad region. And then you have the northern regions, which is the Himalayan regions, where you have other people who live, and that borders Chinese-occupied Tibet. So that is the geography of Nepal, and the center of power has always resided in the Kathmandu region for quite a long time. So that is just briefly the geography of Nepal. Now, if you look at the history, yes, Prithvi Narayan Shah you can consider him to be the founder of the kingdom of Nepal. If you look at the history of Nepal, going back 2,500 years, let's say, okay, let's not go back too far, only 2,500 years. So Nepal was part of at least a couple of Mahajanapadas of the ancient period, the present day region of Nepal. You had the Vriji Mahajanapad. Okay, it was located north of the Ganga, and it extended all the way into the Pahad region, the present day Pahad region of Nepal. And the capital was Vaishali, right? So, and the Vriji Confederacy, it included dynasties like the Lichavi dynasty, and they have historically been connected with Nepal. And, I think at least one branch of the Lichavi dynasty ruled Nepal until the start of, I don't know, this second millennium AD, right? So that's the Lichavi dynasty, and I think it was Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty who married a Lichavi princess, and that elevated his status, and it really made a difference for him. So that's how highly regarded the Lichavi dynasty was. So Nepal, much of Nepal was at one point in time part of the Vriji or Vajji Mahajanapad. Then some parts of Nepal were also part of the Kosala Mahajanapada's territory. Okay, parts of southern Nepal, the Tarai region. So the Lichavi dynasty was very prominent in Nepal, and they ruled all the way up to at least the 9th or 10th centuries AD, possibly in the second millennium AD also. And Nepal was obviously part of the Mauryan Empire. Okay, as Magad rose and extended its power everywhere, well, much of Nepal became incorporated into the Magad, the Maurya Empire. I'm sure it was part of the Kushan Empire also, and also part of the Gupta Empire. I'm pretty sure about that. So there you have it. Now, when it comes to Prithvi Narayan Shah, he conquered the Nevar Valley, also called the Nepal Valley, in 1768. So he was the king of the Gorkha dynasty. And he was not the founder. The founder, I forget the name of the founder. You can look it up. The founding of the dynasty happened a couple of centuries before Prithvi Narayan Shah's conquest of the Nevar Valley. And Prithvinarayan Shah was the greatest king of this dynasty, and he expanded his kingdom, and that's what became Nepal. In Nepal, the British Raj never incorporated it into the British Raj because they wanted it to remain a buffer state between British occupied India and Tibet, where there was some hints of Chinese uh, involvement. So they wanted a buffer. They wanted to keep the Chinese away because the Chinese were trying to interfere in Tibet. Uh, so Nepal as a separate entity, as a distinct entity, emerges around 1768 with the establishment of this kingdom or an expansion of the kingdom by Shri Prithvi Narayan Shah. And ever since that time, it's been a distinct entity, distinct political entity, a distinct state, and it has remained that. So that is essentially the birth of the Nepalese identity as a separate identity. That's around the time of Shri Prithvi Narayan Shah. Hope that explains the matter. Okay, Sarvesh Verma says, why did India's empires from the Indus Valley and Mauryas, and the Guptas, and Mauryas to the Guptas and Cholas and Mughals collapse without the civilizational free fall seen in Rome, the Maya lowlands, or the late Bronze Age world? Elsewhere, cities, scripts, and economies vanished. In India, culture, trade, and regional power often thrived. Will today's global empires fall like their ancient counterparts, leaving behind little? And if they do, will India emerge again with its core intact while others fade? Okay, before I address the question, I would not consider the Mughal Empire to be an Indian empire, civilizationally or culturally. Yeah, of course, it was based in India. It was based out of Delhi for quite some time. But it was, like the Chinese say, the Chinese have a term for this sort of empire, a conquest dynasty. It's a bunch of foreigners who have come and occupied the land, conquered the land, and they create an empire. So the Yuan dynasty is a classic example of a conquest dynasty. The Yuan dynasty, its founder is considered to be Shri Chinggis Khan. And the first proper emperor out of China was Shri Kublai Khan. So that's the Yuan dynasty. It was Mongols ruling over China out of Beijing. That's a conquest dynasty, not a Chinese dynasty per se. Not really Chinese dynasty, ethnically. Eventually, culturally, they became Chinese slowly. So when it comes to the Mughal Empire, it was not really an Indian dynasty. I don't see it as an Indian dynasty culturally or civilizationally at all. But anyhow, the bigger point is what you're making over here. So we've had empires and various kingdoms and states that have come and gone, risen and fallen in India. Another example of a conquest dynasty is in India is the Kushan dynasty, the Kushan Empire. But they became thoroughly Indianized, and ethnically they were not that different from from Indians. Anyhow, so yeah, we've had the rise and fall of dynasties in India and empires. The Mauryan Empire, which was a pan-India, pan-subcontinent empire, eventually declined and fell. It fell, and the successor state was the Shunga Empire. And you've had the rise and fall of the Kushan Empire, which spread Indian culture far and wide, right? Far and wide. Then you had the Gupta Empire, the Chola Empire, and so many empires. They came and fell, they came and went, they came and went. But you did not see any civilizational free fall in India. The culture and the civilization persisted and actually even thrived, kept on thriving, right? That's what happened. There are times when the culture doesn't do very well, civilization is not doing that great because there's the absence of a great power that supports the culture, but that's how it is. Now, when it comes to the Mayans, the Maya lowlands, etc. See, the Mayan culture, it begins in the first half of the first millennium AD. Around 200, 300 AD, that's where you have the emergence of the Maya city-states and all that, and then Maya culture really thrives. That's what happened, and it saw a downfall around 700 to 900 AD or something like that. Around that time, you can look up the exact dates. Okay, I don't memorize dates, but it's around that time. And the Maya Empire, the Maya region, is essentially the Yucatan plus region of Mexico. Let's quickly Google it. Since we have a map, let's take advantage of the map. So we're talking about this part of Mexico. Okay, the Yucatan region, and larger than Yucatan, but overall centered around Yucatan. That's where you had the Maya culture, civilization, and that declined, and then eventually you had the Triple Alliance, the Aztec Empire, like they call it, which came in its place in the same region. But the Maya culture and civilization never really vanished. Never really vanished. Even today, you have people who speak Mayan derived languages and practice what you could call Mayan culture. So, despite the fall of the Mayan Empire, essentially, Mayan culture or civilization did not disappear entirely. Today, it's more or less kind of semi extinct. It's because of the European influence. See, Hernan Cortes, the Spanish conquistador, destroyed destroyed the Triple Alliance Empire, the Aztec Empire. I think he reached Mexico in 1519 or something, and he unleashed horrific devastation on the people and the culture. So the Mayan Empire, the culture, it declined because of that. You have Rome. Yeah, Rome was destroyed by Christianity, by the way. True fact. Late Bronze Age world, we still, there's still a lot of dispute about what really happened. Was it climate change? Was it some environmental catastrophes, tsunamis, earthquakes? What was it that destroyed the late Bronze Age world in the Eastern Mediterranean region, and what they call the Fertile Crescent, the Mesopotamian region, and so on? There's still big questions about it. How did so many empires fall and disappear entirely, vanish without a trace? But in India, empires have come and gone, but our culture, our civilization has remained intact. What happened? Why is it so? Because, see, today it's not the case really. Today I'm speaking a foreign language. I'm more comfortable in a foreign language. I'm wearing foreign clothes. I read books that are in a foreign language. Our education system is a foreign education system. Our so-called constitution is entirely foreign. Our system of governance is foreign. Our education system is foreign. Everything is foreign here today. That all the institutions are foreign. Do you really see us as a civilization today? We are falling. We're falling. You see what's happened? Something changed. We were conquered by foreign cultures, and they took systematic steps to break us culturally and civilizationally, and it's succeeding. After 1947, it is the Indian government that has done that, continued that, and taken it forward. Various successive Indian governments, right? Um, so why did that not happen before the past, let's say, 250, 300 years, let's say 500 years? Why did it not happen? Because whichever kingdoms and empires came and went in India, they were all offspring of the same civilization. So you have the Maurya Empire that comes and rises and reaches its pinnacle, then eventually declines and falls. It is replaced by the Shunga Empire. Same culture, same civilization. They did not launch any attack or assault on our civilization. They strengthened it in their own way, maybe a different way, but they strengthened it. So the focus was no longer on Bodh Dharma, it was on what we now call Hinduism, Hindu Dharma, right? In the Pushyamitra Shunga Empire. During the Maurya Empire, the focus, at least during Ashok's time, was more on Bodh Dharma. And one of his descendants focused on Jaina Dharma, of course. Yeah, we know that. Then you have the Gupta Empire that comes, the Kushan Empire. The Kushan Empire also propagated our culture and civilization, not just in India, all across the world, as far as possible, at least, especially eastwards, towards China. It is Shri Kanishka and his descendants who started propagating Indian culture eastwards all the way to China. It's Kanishka who started the process. So he spread our culture far and wide. He did more than anybody else to spread our culture beyond our shores, beyond our natural boundaries. Then you had the Gupta Empire. Once again, a beautiful efflorescence of the same culture and civilization in a different shape and form. So, and then you have the Cholas who took our culture all the way to all the way as far east as the Philippines, and so on and so on. So it's always been the same civilization that has given rise to multiple empires. So the collapse of an empire did not destroy our culture. It was too deep rooted to destroy. Our culture is 60, 70,000 years old. Our culture is the continuation of the culture of the people who came with the last out of Africa migration about 70 or whatever thousand years ago. The population that we have in India is a descendant of that ancient population. And we have always had cultural continuity. We know the cultural continuity goes back at least 10,000 years. It may go back 50, 60, 70,000 years possibly. We don't know. So because our culture and civilization is so deep rooted, it's always been resilient. It's withstood all this, ups and downs. When it comes to other cultures, well, they've been destroyed. So Rome had its own polytheistic culture, which was part of the same greater Indo-European culture and religion, and it was destroyed by Christianity. So Christianity sought to destroy, to uproot the native culture and religion and replace it with Christianity. And that's what happened. So that's why civilization was destroyed in Rome. Same in Greece. Same everywhere in Europe. When it comes to the Americas, genocide, cultural and endemic genocide. So, and the same was attempted in the past 1,000 years in India, and now we are seeing it coming, bearing fruit, because now we are increasingly deracinated. Our youth don't even know what their culture is. They don't see any connection with their culture. It's becoming more and more apparent today. So now it is succeeding in India. Maybe in 100 years, the same thing will have happened in India. Maybe our descendants will be practicing a whole different set of religions. It's very possible if we are not careful about this. Okay, Amisha says, what war in world history is considered to be the most brutal and the bloodiest war? Well, the answer, actually, straightforward. If you want the number one war, obviously it's the Second World War, the worst war of all. Okay, it is believed that it killed between 80 to 85 million people. The Second World War. So that's easy. But there have been lots of other wars that have been frightening, but people don't know about them. So let's Google a few of these, shall we? We will start with China. China really features a lot in this. So, for example, how many of you have heard of the Three Kingdoms Civil War? Three Kingdoms Civil War, War of the Three Kingdoms. Not that. China, okay, I should not use such language here. China, Three Kingdoms, Chinese Civil War, not the Kuomintang thing. I mean, why? Look, the Three Kingdoms. What does it say? As far as I remember, 30 to 40 million people died during this time. Tremendous downfall. Multiple plagues, widespread famine, civil war, obviously, which causes all the plagues and widespread all of that. Jin, how many thousands and so on. Okay, they're trying to hide the actual numbers here, possibly. Okay, I'll not waste your time by trying to dig out the figures. But the Three Kingdoms Civil War, it had a death toll. Okay, this happened in the 3rd century AD or something like that. 220 to 280 AD. Yeah, 3rd century AD, that's right. The death toll was about 30 to 40 million Chinese people died. Then let's look at the An Lushan rebellion. Okay. It's able to predict my moves. So this was a civil war again at the midpoint of the Tang dynasty. So it's in the this happened in the 8th century AD, and this is again in China. And I'm not sure if they will tell you the death toll, but the death toll is about 30 to 40 million. 30 to 40 million, okay, in the 8th century AD. Good God, what on earth is China up to? Then you have something more recent, okay, in the mid of the 19th century, the Taiping Rebellion. This was a Christian rebellion against China, okay? Taiping Civil War, whatever we want to call it. It says 20 million deaths. I think it was about 30 million. Okay, it says death toll between 20 to 30 million, and there are various estimates. Taiping Rebellion, would you believe it? So much in China. Then you have the Manchu conquest of China, okay? Manchu conquest of China. I mean, how many people died in the Manchu conquest? About 20, 30 million here also. So this was in the 17th century, transition from Ming to Qing or whatever they want to call it. So this you can look up the figures in your own time, okay, how many people died or whatever. The Manchu conquest has a death toll of between 20 to 30 million. Then you have another thing in the 19th century, Dungan Revolt. This was a Muslim, rebellion against China. Hui Muslims. So this was Yaqub Beg, who was one of the major figures in this. Yeah. So this had a death toll of more than 20 million. What does it say? Population loss of 21 million people. Combination of massacres, migration, famine, corpse transmitted plague, and all that. Then you have the First World War. More than 20 million people died. Then you have Timur's conquests of Central Asia, Iran, India. Probably more than 50 to 20 million people died in that. Timur's conquests. He was a brutal barbarian. Then you have the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Okay, Hernan Cortez begins in, like I said, 1519. At least 10 million people must have died just in Mexico. The Aztec Triple Alliance, based out of Tenochtitlan. Then you have the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in South America, the western part of South America, the Inca Empire, Pachacuti, so and so on. So the perpetrator of this was Francesco Pizarro. And at least I would say 7-8 million people died in that. And if you look at the colonization of the Americas, well, 85 to 100 million people were killed. Brutal. So and if you look at the Turkic occupation of India, I'm pretty sure the death toll is in the hundreds of millions. I would even venture 500 million. And some idiots will say, oh, how can it be 500 million? Our population was 300 million at the time. So, this show, Ask Abhijit show, is not for those kind of people. All right, next question. Okay, a couple of people have asked about the French Revolution. Samarth says, when the French Revolution began in 1789, the monarchy was overthrown. Yes, the monarchy. But why did the French Empire emerge afterwards, instead of continuing the République as envisioned during the Revolution? Was it because the First Republic was too weak? Or was there a larger, perhaps hidden plan to expand and dominate the world under the guise of republican ideals? Is this the only cause for the French Revolution, or are there other reasons why it remains one of the most studied and popular events in history? And Amisha asks a very fundamental question. Why is the French Revolution so famous? And why is it so deeply studied compared to various other revolutions? Right, the French Revolution. So if you want to understand what caused the French Revolution, you have to go back to 18th century Europe, the age of what they call Enlightenment. You had great towering colossal figures like John Locke, like Voltaire, like Rousseau, fantastic people who came up with these concepts like individual rights. Rousseau came up with the concept of the social contract. What social contract? He said that there has to be a social contract, and this says that political power resides among the people, and governments should be based on the consent of the governed. So that should be the social contract. And out of this came the great principles of liberté, égalité et fraternité, liberty, equality, and fraternity of all men. And later they brought in laicité, secularism. Yes? So all of these things, they created this gigantic ferment in society in Europe, particularly France. Okay? And this gave rise to the fantastic French Revolution, which was a decade of terror. 1789 to 1799, thereabouts. And, absolute reign of terror. Robespierre was one of the instigators and one of the major figures. He himself was off with his head. He himself was guillotined. Yeah. So it was, that's what happened. And in the kingdom, the royalty, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they were deposed and their heads were separated from their bodies. They were divested of their heads. During this time, so the French Revolution, you could say, was the first woke revolution of Europe. The old ideals, the conservative ideals, were thrown out of the window, and all these new liberal ideas came in, and that changed Europe forever, and that changed France forever. Even today, if you look at France, they kind of make fun of their royalty. When you had the Paris Olympics, Paris, you had the opening ceremony in which they were making fun of Marie Antoinette, weren't they? They were showing her with her head in her lap, and she's singing. The head is singing from the lap. They still make fun of the royalty. And the French Republic's ideals are the ideals of the French Revolution, even today. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, and they've added laicité. Now, who enters the picture? Well, a fantastic gentleman enters the picture. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was born in Corsica. Would you like to see where is Corsica? It was not part of France. It was part of Italy. Okay? It was part of Italy. Let me show you the map. We go to Europe, and we go to the Mediterranean Sea. And here we have Corse. It's now called Corse. It was called Corsica. And the capital is Ajaccio or Ajaccio. I don't know how they pronounce it, but whatever. This was the capital. And I believe Napoleon was born there or thereabouts. and his father fought the French. See, Italy sold this island to France, but the people of the island, they don't want to be part of France. They identified as Italian. So Napoleon's father actually fought the French, but then the French prevailed, and then he became an agent of France. Very smart tactical move. And he enrolled Napoleon in French military schools and all that. And Napoleon, well, he found the time over there very tough because he had a different accent and he looks different, and he intellectually was very different from the ordinary French student, and so on. And then the French Revolution breaks out in 1789, and Napoleon very smartly goes back to Corsica at the time, and he sits out the bloodiest portion of the French Revolution. So he was born in Corsica, and for some time he even flirted with the idea of going to the UK and becoming an officer in their navy. He had no actual loyalty to France or whatever, because he was rootless, because he should have been Italian. He was made to be French, and now he was like, I'll go wherever I can go. But anyhow, he went back to study in France, and eventually he became an officer in one of the French armies. And the first great thing he did was his action in the siege of Toulon. Now I could again open the map and show you where it happened, but I've done that in the past video. So if you are interested in the details, you can look up the siege of Toulon or Napoleon on my channel, and you will see that video in which I've shown the map and exactly where the entire action happened. But the siege of Toulon was a siege of the city of Toulon by the Royal Navy, British Royal Navy, and the Navy had blockaded the city. And Napoleon was able to end the blockade. 1790, first half of the 1790s. So that made Napoleon kind of famous, and he became a big deal. And then 1795, I think, there was a royalist uprising in Paris. Okay? And Napoleon ended the uprising by firing cannons at protesters. He called it a whiff of grape shot, a whiff of gunpowder. He fired cannons at a crowd of protesters and ended the royalist uprising, and that really rose his star. And eventually, Napoleon engineered a coup, the coup of 18th of Brumaire, and he became the consul general or whatever. And by 1804, he was emperor of France. By 1805, he was king of Italy. So in about 19 years, he went from complete obscurity to becoming the emperor of France and the king of Italy. So he convinced the ringleaders, you could say, of the French Revolution, that the only way to preserve the ideals of the French Revolution was by making him the emperor and bringing royalty back. What a guy. What a guy. Yes. So that's what happened. That's essentially the story. Now, why is the French Revolution so famous and studied so much? Because it's been so influential in the small region called Europe, and the Europeans rule the world today via their various offshoots like the US. So even today, if you look at India, the Constitution of India, I suppose it makes some allusions to liberté, égalité, fraternité. I suppose the judiciary of India also talks about liberty, equality, fraternity, and all that. So it's been so influential. These are regarded as the highest ideals in a democracy and in liberal democracies and all that. So you could say it was the first, you could say, woke revolution, which overthrew the old conservative traditions that have essentially been at the heart of all human history for centuries, if not millennia. So that's why it's been so influential, and that's why it's studied so much. Okay, Nayan Jyoti Bora says, could you explain about the Gulag system during the days of the USSR, its context and the historical significance? Gulags were labor camps, prisons, but not just regular prisons where you lock up prisoners in cells. These were labor camps, forced labor. So there were hundreds of these labor camps, more than 500, I'm pretty sure, across the USSR. All the way from the European part of the USSR, all the way to the far east of the USSR, all the way to Sakhalin, so the Kamchatka Peninsula at least. Okay? Map, so that we understand what we're talking about. Otherwise, some people may, I'm sure, not get the reference, the context, and that's not your fault. It's your geography teacher's fault. I don't blame you for that. So, let's take a look at the map. So the USSR, well, Belarus and Ukraine were part of the USSR in those days. Also, the Baltic nations, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So all the way from here, all the way across Eurasian USSR, all the way up to Kamchatka. This is the uh, Kamchatka Peninsula. Okay. So these gulags were a network, you could say, or an archipelago of more than 500 forced labor camps. Prisoners would be sent there for years, maybe for decades, and they would be made to do forced labor. Some of these prisoners would be just criminals, and some of them would be political prisoners who were thrown into jail because they were inconvenient to the Soviet, to the Communist Party of the USSR. So many dissidents, many people who wanted more rights, more freedoms, people who wanted democracy, people who opposed Stalin, whatever, they were all thrown into gulags. Many famous people went into gulags, and many of them never came out. So these were labor camps, forced labor camps, and tremendously horrific conditions, usually very cold weather, freezing conditions. Many people would be freed from gulags when they were on the verge of dying. They would be released, and that sort of thing. And one of the most famous inmates of the gulags was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Nobel laureate, Nobel Peace Prize, historian and writer of literature. His expose of the system was called the Gulag Archipelago. It's a pretty voluminous set of at least 2 or 3 books, if I remember reading some part of it back in the day. So in this book he describes the brutal conditions that you have when you live in the gulags. One of the interesting things is there is a road, there's a highway in the USSR, in Russia today. It's called the Highway of Bones. The Highway of Bones. So let me see if I can find this Highway of Bones. Shall I? Okay, I need to orient myself. I need to go to Kamchatka, Magadan. So you see this road here. You can see this road traced on the map over here. So let's zoom in, and let's try and see the satellite image of this road. All right, here we are. Let's zoom in further. It's called P504, right? P504. Let's see if we can get a street view image of this. Do they have a street view image? You see this road, standard looking highway, right? So you see this region in the winter, it freezes solid, absolutely frozen over. And there are parts of this region where the temperature in winter goes to like minus 50 degrees Celsius. Frightening conditions, frightening climatic conditions. So this highway 504, it was constructed by slave labor, by labor taken from the gulags. And conditions were so bad that we don't even know how many people died there. And because the ground was frozen, it was permafrost. So there was no way to bury the people. So what they would do is they would just put the people under the road. So this entire road, it is alleged, is paved by the bones of prisoners who died constructing the road. And if you don't believe what I am saying, if it sounds too fantastic and ridiculous, let's Google it. Highway of Bones, Russia, shall we? Let's Google it. Highway of Bones. Of Bones, Russia. Highway of Bones, Russia. R40504. Isn't that the one we just saw? 504, was it? It was called P504 in the map that we just saw. So R504, Kolyma Highway, M56 route, Far East, Magadan. There you have it. It connects Magadan. It's been colloquially called the Road of Bones. And inmates of the Savotslag labor camp and started the first stretch, and construction continued with the use of gulag labor until 1953. So there you have it. It really is called the Highway of Bones or Road of Bones. So that's how it was. And you know, during the Second World War, Joseph Stalin gave a bit of amnesty to inmates of gulags. He gave them a deal. Here's the deal: you fight in the war, and I'll give you either amnesty, I'll free you from jail, or maybe I'll give you reduced term. So once you're done fighting, if you survive, then instead of 50 years, you can do just like 3 years, that sort of thing. So a lot of people were freed from the gulags. They fought in the war. Many of them died. Some of them who returned survived. Some of them were just freed. Some of them were sent back to the gulags for a shorter period of time. And that gave rise to the Suka Wars. Suka Wars. So let's Google that. What on earth? Okay. The things I show you. Suka Wars. It's called the Bitch Wars for whatever reason. These were armed confrontations in the Soviet Gulag labor system between 1945 and 53. The battles took place between groups of prisoners who had agreed to collaborate with the administration of labor camps and prisons, and honest criminals who did not collaborate with prison authorities. So if you have people who have been freed and given an amnesty, and they survived the war and came back, and as long as they behaved, they were to be released in just a short amount of time, they would also obviously collaborate with the authorities. And that was jarring for the people, for the inmates who had not taken the amnesty and who refused to collaborate with the authorities. So this gave rise to these clashes in the Gulag system between the ones who had the thief's honor code and the ones who were called the Sukas. The Suki, plural in Russian. And eventually the Suki won. So yeah, that's what it was. The Gulag system was this brutal slave labor system. Many political prisoners were eaten alive by that, and lots of criminals also were part of that. And eventually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, after Stalin died, the system was gradually dismantled and ended. So that was the Gulag system. The deal was that, if you went against the interests of the state, of the nation, or the China or the Soviet Communist Party, you'd be thrown into gulags. No questions asked. That's how it went. Amisha Mishra says, do we have any data on how many Indians were killed during British rule from 1757 to 1947? Well, if you look at Indian historians and their work, you will see nothing. Nobody has tried to estimate this properly. If you look at the records of the famines that the British caused, they caused, I would say, dozens, maybe hundreds of famines in India, various parts of India, during the 2.5 centuries that they occupied India. And if you look at some of these famines, you had death tolls of 5 million, 10 million. The Madras famine of, I don't know which year, caused a death toll of, I think, between 5 to 10 million. And then you had an auxiliary death toll, which was caused by epidemics caused by the famine, but that would not be added to the death toll of the famine. So maybe 100 plus million just from the famines. Okay. But there were other things. So I was looking at this. Some of these examples. Let's go there. So there have been various estimates. Some people have tried to estimate this outside of India. So this is Ben Norton scholarly study found that British colonialism caused approximately 165 million deaths in India between 1880 to 1920. 40 years, 165 million people died in India. The British killed 165 million people, okay, in just 40 years. If you don't believe this website, look here. Al Jazeera. British colonialism killed 100 million Indians in 40 years. So at least 100 million Indians in 40 years, just 40 years. And then you have this report from The Guardian itself. The Guardian is a British newspaper. India's secret history. So British reprisals involved the killing of 10 million people over a period of 10 years after 1857. So between 1857 to 1867, the British killed Indians, at least 10 million Indians, in a variety of ways, in revenge for 1857. So we have all these different pieces of data, but nobody has really bothered to do a project and to compile everything together and put all the data together and create a systematic survey in which you can find the real death toll. I would say if you just look at these rough numbers and you do just a rough tally, if you take the famines, it's 100 million. Al Jazeera says 100, the other one says 165. Let's say 100. So 100 plus 100 is 200. Plus you have 1857 to 67, 10. So that's 210. Plus all the epidemics that are not counted. The death toll of epidemics is not counted. Maybe in excess of 300 million easily. That's what the British did. Absolute monsters. And today they lecture us about human rights and freedom and all that. And Indians are such Anglophiles. They killed your ancestors, they killed your relatives in the most brutal and barbaric ways you can imagine. Men, women, little children, little kids starving to death. Okay, Nirvana Shanks says, how did the Mongol Empire grow so fast across all of Eurasia? And what were the most important forces that made it happen? Thank you for your attention to this question. So I did an episode on the Mongol Empire. Maybe it was episode 2 or 3 or something of the Ask Abhijit show. Today is episode 278. So maybe we can revisit some questions about the Mongol Empire. It's been a long time since I spoke about this matter, and I'm sure a lot of subscribers have not seen me speak about this and may have these questions. So we can certainly revisit this. How did the Mongol Empire grow so fast across all of Eurasia? What made it happen? The most important forces. So if you look at the region of Mongolia in the 1200s, 1300s, what was the population? Maybe a million or 2 million. Okay. Maybe a couple of million. Let's quickly do a quick Google search. What is the population of Manipur today? Okay, 1 second. Here. Population of Manipur today. 3.75 million. So Manipur is this tiny state in the far east of India, right? 3.75 million is the population today. The population of Mongolia was less than that, maybe 2-3 million. Okay. And out of that little population came the greatest empire in human history until that time. So the people of Mongolia were used to hardship. The weather in Mongolia is essentially the same as the weather in Ladakh today, in northern India, minus the altitude. The climate in Ladakh is even harsher than Mongolia because of the extreme altitudes. But otherwise, the climate in Mongolia is essentially the same as Ladakh, if you subtract the effects of altitude. Extreme cold and so on, and lack of water, etc. That sort of thing. So the people of Mongolia were used to extreme hardship for centuries, for millennia, and they lived in small nomadic groups. So they were accustomed to a very disciplined, very regimented lifestyle. The moment you broke discipline, you died. That's how bad it was. So they were used to very tough conditions. And they had these little clans or tribes. The Borjigin, the Olkhunut, the Uryankhai, and the Naimans, and various other tribes. And all the tribes would fight each other because of the scarce resources. So they would try and live as far as apart as possible, but if they came into contact, they would essentially fight. And the Chinese were the biggest instigators who kept the tribes fighting each other. The Chinese. So you had these people who were accustomed to extreme hardship. They were accustomed to living in almost a militaristic fashion, but they were fighting each other. So somebody had to come and unite them, and that somebody was Sri Chinggis Khan. So for the first 43, 44, maybe 45 years of his life, he spent fighting the various Mongol tribes and unifying them. When he unified them, he said, all right, it's time to go. First, let's teach the Chinese a lesson. They've been bleeding us for centuries. So that's where it starts. So the Mongols were already accustomed to a militaristic lifestyle, a regimented lifestyle. Genghis Khan weaponized that. And he enlisted the entire corpus of the Mongolian population into the military. Everybody, every able-bodied man or boy became a warrior. Older people became shepherds and tenders of livestock because their entire food was based on sheep, mutton. So that's what happened. And Genghis Khan, well, he was a genius. So he was able to organize the Mongol army in such a way that nobody had done before. And at the pinnacle of Genghis Khan's powers, at the pinnacle of his career, the Mongol army was at most 100,000 strong, 1 lakh. You could fit the entire Mongol army into the Eden Garden Stadium or the Narendra Modi Stadium. And with that army, he conquered half the known world. So he conquered it through incredibly brilliant tactics and strategies. He also had incredibly brilliant generals like Subotai Bahadur, right? Um, the Mongols pioneered so much. They pioneered what we now call the Blitzkrieg. They Genghis Khan understood that on a battlefield, it's all the flow of energy that matters. He could see he could visualize the battlefield as if he was like a kilometer above the battlefield. He could see how things were going. He understood the role that energy and momentum played in battles, and he innovated various battle strategies and tactics, the two horns maneuver, and so much more. And the entire purpose of existence of the Mongol population was war. That's how it went. But Genghis Khan, at least while he was alive, he only fought just wars. He did not start wars because it just felt like it, and that's a whole different story. So because of this combination of factors, it grew incredibly fast, and they had tremendous communications. They had a postal service. They had communications that were like unimaginably fast for the 13th century, for the 14th century, for the 13th century. Nobody communicated at that speed. And the speed at which the armies moved on the battlefield was unimaginable. And a lot of this was thanks to the Mongolian pony. It's a horse that's like shorter than the Arabian horses or whatever else. It's very similar to the Manipuri pony, by the way. And yeah, so it's the Mongolian pony. This little horse that was the battle tank of the Mongolian armed forces. So it was a combination of all these factors that made this happen. Good question. Good question. All right. Now, next question. Magnificent Shri Nehruji says, how did the Mongol Empire maintain trade and communication across such a massive land area? So, at its pinnacle during Shri Genghis Khan's time, half the known world was conquered by the Mongol Empire, excluding India. Yeah. And we know the answer to the question. Now, how did they maintain trade and communication? Because if you want to maintain a cohesive empire that doesn't disintegrate spontaneously, you need communications. You need to know exactly what's happening in various parts of the empire. And sometimes, when you're talking about an empire like the Mongol Empire, we're talking about thousands of kilometers. So how do you know what's happening 2,000 kilometers away, for example? You've got to know, otherwise you lose all control. Not only do you need to know what's happening, you need to be able to control what's happening. So you need constant communication. So the Mongols had the world's best postal service, courier service, and a system of communicators based on horses. So they would have these checkposts at distances of, let's say, roughly 50 to 100 kilometers, and you would have fresh horses everywhere. So a guy who's, let's say, going from Karakoram to maybe the borderlands of present-day Ukraine, bearing a message from Shri Genghis Khan to his vassal there, or to his general there. So if Genghis Khan sends a message, he will give it to a rider who will ride at the speed of sound, essentially, as fast as possible. And the moment he reaches the next checkpoint, he will surrender his horse there and take a fresh horse and go and go and go. And that way they could cover incredible distances in very short periods of time. So that's how they were able to maintain communication. And trade is a more leisurely thing. And they had a proper system of trade. They had free trade. So you could trade without tax and all that, as long as you were part of the Mongol Empire. So all of this is thanks to the system that Genghis Khan created. A very, very disciplined, well-organized, well-oiled system. And that's how he was able to maintain such a big empire. But eventually the empire it outgrew him. It outgrew the capabilities of any communication system of that time. So eventually the empire grew even further, even larger, and his sons took over, and they had to take various chunks of the empire, and eventually it fragmented because of various reasons, such as infighting and so on. And also because the empire became so large that even with the best communication system in the world, it was no longer possible to communicate in real time, or at least in decent enough time. Shubhankar Kulkarni says, I always wonder how underrated Subotai was as a general. If it were any other European general, large volumes would have been written about him. Subotai coordinated large armies across 1,000 kilometers and led a separate expedition where he defeated the Armenians, Georgians, Rus principalities, the Kubans, and the Kipchaks. I always wonder what a brilliant military general he was. He was Genghis Khan's greatest general. Genghis Khan took him into the army when Subotai was about like a teenager, maybe 13, 14 years old. Subotai belonged to the Urian Khai tribe, and he quickly became one of the trusted lieutenants of Genghis Khan. And obviously, you don't achieve that lightly. You've got to really prove yourself to become someone that Genghis Khan trusts. I mean, a guy like Genghis Khan, to earn his trust, you've got to be special, and that too at such a young age. So Subotai would always put his life on the line, and eventually he showed that he could command a Tuman. A Tuman was a division of 10,000. That was the largest regiment or division they would have in the Mongolian. It's essentially one separate army, and he was sent on expeditions far and wide. At one point in time, Genghis Khan's eldest supposed son, Jochi, was entrusted to the care of Subotai. And they went all the way far west, Ukraine, Russia, those principalities, and they encountered the Europeans for the first time and defeated many of them. So that was the first set of encounters between the Mongols and the Rus and the Eastern Europeans. And Subotai, my God, the coordination. I mean, he, like you say, he could coordinate different armies, different sets of troops over hundreds of kilometers, and make them move in coordination and cohesion, and have them attack at the same time coming from hundreds of kilometers apart. I mean, he did that over and over again. How he did that, God only knows. But that's the kind of incredible general he was. Probably the greatest general that we know of in history. The kind of feats he achieved, how on earth did he achieve those? And after Genghis Khan died, Subotai served Genghis Khan's successor, his son, Ogedai, who was the second emperor of the Mongol Empire. And under Ogedai, as Ogedai's general, Subotai went and conquered Russia, parts of Russia. So under Genghis Khan, he went on reconnaissance missions. He circled which sea was it? He circled, one second, let's see. I believe he circled the Caspian Sea, not the Black Sea. He circled the Caspian Sea with his army on a reconnaissance mission. And then under Ogedai, he went and conquered those lands. Underrated is an understatement. One of the greatest generals, possibly the greatest general of all time, Subotai Bagatir. Magnificent Shri Nehruji. What a name, sir. Okay, the question is, how did the Industrial Revolution improve living standards, but also create new forms of inequality, and how can that duality be addressed today? Okay, let's talk about England, because the Industrial Revolution starts in England, right? How does the Industrial Revolution start? It starts because of the age of Elizabeth. I'm sorry, the Victorian age. Who was Henry's daughter? Henry VIII's daughter. He had two daughters. One was Bloody Mary, and the second was Elizabeth I. Yes, the Elizabethan age. So Elizabeth was a pretty liberal ruler. She was not conservative like her sister Mary. She was more of her father's daughter. Henry VIII was a very interesting person. And under Elizabeth, England completely transformed. She allowed the study of science and physics and so on, and so much happened because of that. So the Industrial Revolution has its roots in the Elizabethan age. Now, if you look at England, historically, what was the society like? We have to understand this to understand the effects of the Industrial Revolution. Historically, England society was a continuation of the society and the system of society that was imposed upon the island by the Normans after the year 1066. So, what kind of society was it? At the top, you had the king or the queen. Typically, it was a king. Below the king, second rank, was the nobles who served the king. So the nobles would generally have some holdings, land holdings. Some would have big land holdings, some would have smaller land holdings, and they would pay a tax to the king every year. They were the king's vassals, and they would have men who would work for them, and then they would have their own private armies. And whenever the king demanded, they would have to come and serve the king and have their army serve the king. That was the deal. And the nobles had lands, and on the lands the peasants toiled. The peasants, what did they toil? What was the toil like? Agriculture. And the agriculture is what generated the revenue and the wealth for the nobles. And a certain percentage of that went to the church, and a certain percentage went to the king, to the crown. That's how it was. At the top, you had the king. Next, you had the nobles. Third, you had the peasants, and then you had slaves. For a time, there were lots of slaves. I mean, during the time of William the Conqueror, I suppose about 10%, about 1,000 years ago, about 10% of England's population was slaves. They would wear copper bands around their necks and they would die with that on. That sort of thing. So it was a pretty brutal system. So the entire economy was based on agriculture. It was a feudal system. A small percentage of the population, maybe 2-3%, maybe less, were landowners. All land was technically owned by the crown, but the nobles, they held the land, they were stewards of the land for the crown, in the service of the crown. So they would take care of all the agricultural work that will happen there, and they would give tax to the king, and some of it they would keep. And thus the peasants, they were essentially owned more or less by the nobles. They were at the mercy of the nobles. So that was the system. So the entire system was based on agriculture, like I said. Now the Industrial Revolution happens. The Industrial Revolution, so all the wealth historically was in the countryside. Wherever you have agricultural fields, that's where the real wealth of the land lay. In England, in Britain. When the Industrial Revolution happened, suddenly cities and factories became the engine that produced this new wealth. And they started producing way more wealth than any wealth that could come from agriculture. So the focus suddenly shifted from the countryside to the cities and the factories. Right? So there's a lot of money to be made there. So what this did is that a new class of people emerged, wealthy people, who were not nobles. They were the industrialists, they were the business people. And they quickly became more wealthy than the nobles. Then the nobles, some of them pivoted and they also became industrialists. Because at the end of the day, money matters. Right? And that caused a profound transformation in the society. Lots of people started congregating in cities, moving. Many of the peasants, they were drawn by the lure of the wealth in the cities, and they also decided, okay, we anyway don't own the land. We are merely working as peasants for the nobles. It's not our land. We don't own it. So let's go and try our luck in the cities, and we'll go and work in a factory. We'll earn more. So then the cities started growing in size, right? But in factories, you had these horrific, abysmal living conditions. People would work in shifts. People would work, 8, 12 hours a day. I don't know what it was. But conditions were pretty abysmal. Child labor was normal. Crime was rampant and so on. So this Industrial Revolution produced a whole new class of elite in England, in Britain. And their wealth came from the exploitation of people. And that was okay. I mean, there was no law against it. So they exploited people. They exploited the peasants. So the peasants who did not own any land in the countryside, now they were in the cities and still they did not own any land. They were living in rented accommodation and they were being worked to death. So yeah, it generated a tremendous amount of wealth. Yeah, England became wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and there's other sources of wealth also. We'll not go into that, but we're talking about the Industrial Revolution. So Industrial Revolution is all about machines. It's about mass production. It's about assembly lines and all that. So if you do that, wealth is generated fast. But the wealth was concentrated among the elites, and that eventually gives rise to what the complaints of Shri Karl Marx. um, so yeah, it kind of raised living standards. Cities became wealthy, and eventually you had the technology that made things better. You had street lights and proper roads and mm, things like that. But it also caused tremendous inequality because of the entire nature of society. The society remained a deeply unequal society. It became feudalism of a new kind, an industrial kind of feudalism, right? And that has continued. I mean, the same continued in the Americas, for example. In the Americas, also, you have these industrialists and these wealthy tycoons or whatever, oil tycoons, oil barons, the Rockefellers, etc. They also continue the same thing, assembly line workers, and so on. But for some time in America, it was better. So, you see, the thing is that no society has complete equality. It's impossible to achieve complete equality. All you can do is give everybody the equal rights, and the same similar starting point for everybody. But that works in theory, not in practice. How can that be addressed today? You can't ever address inequality completely. What you can do is give everybody equal rights and give everybody equal opportunities, and then see how they go. That's what you can do. Obviously, some people will be born into wealthy families. You can't do a thing about that. Obviously, you can't take away their wealth. You should not. Their families are wealthy, hopefully because they earned the wealth, and so on. So essentially, that's what happened during the Industrial Revolution. That's what transformed British society from an agriculture-based feudal society to an industry-based feudal society, and it continued the inequality which you already had in British society, in English society. That never went away. So yeah, that is what happened during the Industrial Revolution. Devan Krishnan says, could you please explain how countries in Southeast Asia became part of the Indosphere and how Singapore became demographically Chinese? Why are there efforts to destroy evidence of ancient Hindu roots in countries like Malaysia? Okay, multiple questions. We'll focus on the main thing. Essentially, two questions. How did countries in Southeast Asia become part of the Indosphere? That process began more than 3,000 years ago. It began with trade activities. You see, the east coast of India, we have forgotten about it completely. Let's go to the map. We have completely forgotten the east coast of India and what it has contributed to our culture, civilization, and history. So let's look at the east coast of India. I am talking about Kalinga, now called Odisha. The northern part of Odisha is called Utkal, right? What is Utkal? It's Uttar Kalinga. Kalinga has this incredibly ancient, incredibly rich history as part of India, as a subset of Indian civilization. So merchants from Kalinga were trading with Southeast Asia, which was called Suvarna Bhumi at the time. At least 2000 years ago, it was called Suvarna Bhumi. So merchants from Kalinga were crossing the ocean on ships and going all the way to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia and Vietnam, also obviously Thailand, Indonesia, etc. They were trading with these regions at least 3,000 years ago, if not more than that. And slowly, this caused the Indianization and Hinduization of the entirety of Southeast Asia. About 2,000 years ago, Indonesia became Hindu. I mean, it was Hindu. All of this entire region, present day Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, uh, Myanmar, I said, Philippines, all of this was Hindu. And much of this region has been Hindu for more than 2,000 years, maybe around 3,000 years. All because of the merchants from Kalinga who would go and trade with these countries. And these countries slowly adopted Indian customs. And they formed great kingdoms and empires in their own right. So that is what happened. That's how this region became part of the Indosphere. We never ever imposed anything on the people of this region. There was never any religious conversion. There was never any conquest except the Chola conquest, which was a geopolitical affair, not anything else. So that is the deal. Now, what about Singapore? So Singapore is over here at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. What happened to Singapore? Obviously, it's called Singapore, right? The city of lions. It's a Sanskrit name. So obviously, it was Hindu in the past. So what happened? Why is it demographically Chinese? I mean, today Singapore has a Chinese majority. What happened is the question. How did that happen? A city that's that's at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. How is it majority Chinese? You see, this region came under British occupation about around the 19th century. Okay, so in the first quarter of the 19th century, the British established colony in Singapore, let's say, and they imported Chinese labor. They imported Chinese labor there, and we discussed some of the biggest wars that have happened earlier in this episode. The Taiping rebellion and the Dungan revolt and all that. So all of that caused a tremendous amount of instability in China in the middle of the 19th century. So that caused a bigger exodus of Chinese out of China elsewhere. Many of them came to Singapore, and the British imported Chinese specifically. So over time, the Chinese population of Singapore grew from like negligible levels to 10%. Then eventually, slowly, by the end of the 19th century, the Chinese became the majority population in Singapore. So that's how Singapore became gradually demographically Chinese majority. That is how it happened. Well, about Malaysia, well, it's an Islamic country, so well, that's how it goes. Yajnavalkya says, where old they were worshipping Iranian religions in Vedic Hinduism in Gandhar, persecuted under Zoroastrianism, for example, under Xerxes in Gandhar, where the devas treated as false gods and demons by the prophet Zarathustra. Was the spread of Zoroastrianism in Persia peaceful, or did it involve intolerant proactive conversion? So, Persia, when we're talking about Persia of ancient Persia, we're talking about the Achaemenid dynasty. The first king of the Achaemenid dynasty was Achaemenes, according to the Greeks. His name. So there's confusion about his name, right? What was his real name? Was it Achaemenes? That's not a Persian name. His name was either Hakshamanish or Hakamanish. Possibly Hakamanish. Hakamanish. What does Haka mean? See, in Persian, Sa becomes Ha. The Indian Sa becomes Ha in Persian. So if you want to say Saraswati, you say Harahavati. So the word for one of the words for friend in Sanskrit is Sakha. Sakha, right? So the Persian equivalent would be Haka. So it's possibly Hakamanish, who was the founder of the Achaemenid dynasty. And he is said to have lived before Zarathustra or Zoroaster, which means that Hakamanish would have been Hindu, right? So he would have practiced the old religion. And then eventually, at some point in time, there's the rise of the religion of Zarathustra. And somehow it spreads all over Persia, and Persia becomes Zoroastrian. Now, the problem is that we don't have any records from those times. Persia obviously was a highly evolved civilization, wasn't it? It was a great civilization. It was burned to the ground by Alexander and the Greeks. It was burned. The great city of Parshvapur was destroyed, burned in a drunken night by Alexander. They blame some woman, companion of his, whatever. And whatever records the Persians had were destroyed. So we don't know how the mechanics and dynamics of how Zoroastrianism became the dominant force, the dominant religion in Persia. We don't know what happened. And we don't know if there was any persecution, any forcible conversion. We don't know how it happened. It's entirely unknown. It's lost in the mists of time. The Greeks destroyed the records. The Greeks, their justification was that the Persians had a century and a half ago burned Athens, so they did this in retaliation. Look, that's okay, whatever, that's history. But they destroyed Persia. They took all the gold of Persia away. They beggared Persia, and yeah, that's what happened. So we don't know what happened. We don't know if it was brutal, if it was peaceful, or it involved intolerant, forceful conversion. We have no idea. But what we know is that the Zoroastrian religion, the religion of Zarathustra, is kind of an inversion of the Vedic religion. It has the same elements, but kind of inverts things. So the Devas become bad guys and the Asuras become the good guys. In Vedic religion, the Devas are the good guys and the Asuras are kind of naughty, a little bit naughty. The Asuras are also divine beings, but they are kind of naughty divine beings, slightly naughty. Not entirely evil, but not entirely the good guys. But the Devas are the good guys. So in Zoroastrianism, the Devas become the bad guys and the Asuras become the good guys. So it's kind of a revolt of some kind. Not that I will disown my religion, but I will invert my religion, that sort of thing. So that's what Zarathustra did. And he came up with this new concept of Ahura Mazda, the supreme Brahman, or that sort of thing, a supreme divinity. But it's not monotheistic. Zoroastrianism is not a monotheistic religion. I don't care what the Westerners say. To hell with the Westerners. It's our culture. I mean, kind of our culture. We have Parsis in India. Ask them whether Zoroastrianism is a monotheistic religion. It's not a monotheistic religion. I don't care what the Westerners say. I don't need their lectures. We don't need them teaching us our history. I consider Iranian Persian history to be kind of part of our overall history, broader our history, our region. So we don't know what happened. We don't know if there was persecution or not. But what we know is that there was never any conflict between India and Persia. Never, ever. And when the Arabs destroyed Persia, the Persians wished that India would come to their help. So when you are in your worst times, who do you wish will come to your help? Your people, right? Your relatives. Yeah, but it did not happen because at that time India was not unified under a single empire. So my point is that I'm not sure. Eventually, the Devas were looked upon as kind of demons. Eventually, over time, in Zoroastrianism, but there was never any conflict with India ever. So yeah, that is what happened. We have lost the records, the records of Persian history written by the Persians themselves, because the Greeks destroyed it. Alexander destroyed it. Yajnavalkya says, in the battles between Greek-speaking regions of Southeast Europe and the Achaemenid Empire that happened a bit pre-Alexander the Greek, do we have any reports from the Persian side? Are there reports of these battles available today by later Greek and Are the reports of these battles available today by later Greek and Roman authors believable? Well, once again, you have hit the heart of the issue, right? You've had battles between Greek-speaking regions of Southeast Europe and the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire was a pretty expansionist empire. The empire of the descendants of Hakamanich. Darius, Xerxes, Kshayrsh. Xerxes, his real name was Kshayrsh. It was not Xerxes. Okay? And Darius was Darius. Cyrus was Kurush. Cambyses was Cambodia. All the names are names we can recognize. These are not Greek names. The Greeks have given their own names. So the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire, was always expansionist. They always expanded westwards. Their enemies were the Greeks. They wanted to conquer Greece. And Kshayrsh tried that, right? He kind of succeeded, actually. 300, that story. It was actually 700. This great expansionist empire never even considered expanding eastwards towards India. Never. Always westwards. Greeks. We'll fight the Greeks. Never the Indians. There must be some reason for it. Now, you had all these battles and wars that happened, and we only have reports that are Greek reports. We don't have any Persian records, right? We don't have any reports written by Persians. It's always reports written by Greeks and Romans. Why is it? Because the Persians eventually conquered, the Greeks eventually conquered Persia. Alexander did. And Alexander destroyed Persia. Wiped it clean, burned it to the ground. That's what it did. Everything was destroyed. No records available. Everything is gone. Only the Bhagasthana inscription is left. Behistun inscription, it's called today. Behistun was once called Bhagasthana, and it's written in the Persian language. If you read it, it sounds like Sanskrit. So we don't have reports from the Persian side, and the reports of battles available by Greek and Roman authors will obviously, you have to take them with a grain of salt, because they will embellish their glory and all that. They will embellish the reports and make it sound like the Greeks were better, superior, and the Persians were naughty and bad and evil and inferior. Obviously, you do that, right? History is written by the victor. So, yeah, you can't really believe those records entirely. Alexandria. Yajnavalkya says, was Alexandria, Egypt, founded by Alexander the Greek, or is this also a hoax? Well, as far as I know, it was founded by Alexander. See, Alexander is said to have founded multiple cities called Alexandria all over the place, multiple Alexandrias, including a couple of Alexandrias in Western India, allegedly. We have never found any evidence of any Alexandria in Western India. Never. Archaeologists have searched for it for decades, or for centuries. We have never found any Alexandria in Western India, Northern Western India, Gandhar, wherever. We have never found it. He is also said to have founded Alexandria in Scythia, Alexandria in other parts of of possibly Persia, Mesopotamia. We have found no Alexandrias, but there's one, Al-Iskandriya, in Egypt. It's called Al-Iskandriya. Would you like to look at it? Let's take a look at it. We shall look at Alexandria in Egypt. And that is most likely a city that was actually founded by Alexander the Greek. So this is one Alexandria that actually exists, and it was founded by the guy. And it still exists. And there used to be, I believe, a great lighthouse there and a great library there. And it is said that Alexander is buried in Alexandria. It is said that one of the tombs of some Islamic saint there is actually Alexander in disguise. I mean, it used to be Alexander's tomb, allegedly. And after the Islamic the takeover of the region by Islamic forces, they converted that into allegedly an Islamic saint's tomb so that it will not be destroyed by the conquerors, by the occupiers. That's what one hears, but I don't know which tomb it is. And anyway, I have no intention of visiting. So, Nirvana Shanks says, do you think the world would be a very different place if the Library of Alexandria had never been destroyed? Thank you for your attention to this question. So Alexandria is said to have had a great library. And we just took a look at Alexandria, the map. So what happened to that library? Yes, what happened? It was burned. Who burned it? Julius Caesar. Well, his army burned it. And it is said that, they had to set fire to some ships to prevent a rebellion from spreading or something, and the fire just spread across the city and it burned the library. Not our fault. We didn't mean to do that sort of thing. But truth is, Julius Caesar burned the library at Alexandria, and it is said to have had tens of thousands of scrolls and whatnot, and all that knowledge disappeared from the world, sadly. Well, yeah, it's sad. It's the burning of any library is unfortunate, especially an Egyptian library, and imagine the kind of knowledge that would have been there. We would have had a much richer understanding of Egyptian history and much more of the world's history of that region if that library had survived until today. Yeah. So would the world have been a different place? Kind of, to some extent. But I'll tell you what would have made the world a really different place. If the libraries in Indian universities had not been destroyed, that would have made the world a genuinely different place. Nalanda, Takshashila, Telhara, Vikramshila, Odantapuri, Vallabhi, Sharapit. Each of these universities had massive, magnificent libraries. Each were destroyed. Each of these libraries was destroyed. If those libraries had not been destroyed, that would have made the world a completely different place. So that, I hope, puts things in the right perspective and gives the right context. Yajnavalkya says, and we're talking about, okay, did the religion founded by Akhenaten have an influence on Judaism? So Akhenaten, what does the name Akhenaten mean? Well, as a kid, when I was about what, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, I read The History of Civilization by Will Durant. It's a set of 12 books, big, thick books. And I read the Egyptian part of the history. And that had a section, obviously, on Akhenaten. So Akhenaten was married to Queen Nefertiti, that very famous lady, uh, whose statue still, whose face portrait, the statue still survives, and she's regarded as one of the, uh, you know, most iconic ladies in world history. So she was the wife of Akhenaten. Akhenaten. Now Akhenaten, the name, it means Aten is happy or Aten is pleased. Who is Aten? So Akhenaten had started this new religion, a monotheistic religion, sun worship. There's only one God in the world, and we say the sun is the God. And Akhenaten means Aten is pleased or Aten is happy. My monotheistic God is pleased. So he tried to impose monotheism on Egypt. He tried to undo centuries of Egyptian tradition and culture by imposing monotheism in Egypt. And once he died, his son undid that and brought back Egyptian polytheism. And Akhenaten's images and statues are all defaced and disfigured today. So that was a damnatio memori or something, what they call, damnation of memory, the erasure of this person from history, attempts to erase him from history. So he introduced a monotheistic religion, which he invented and forced it down the throats of the Egyptian people. Did not work. But while he was alive, it was the official state religion. Now, Akhenaten is said to have lived around sometime in the 14th century BC. Shall we look it up quickly? Let's look it up quickly. When did he live? Let's go to Google and let's see Akhenaten. So let's quickly go to Wikipedia. Always remember, Wikipedia is not necessarily a source of correct information, but let's just look at this for saving time. 1353 to 1336 or 1351 to 1334 BC. So the 14th century BC, right? That's when this guy ruled. And let's ask this question: when were the Israelites wow, they found it. It's able to predict what I'm going to ask. The Exodus. So some scholars place the enslavement around 1700 BC. Some say around 13th century BC. So it looks like it is somewhere around that time period. We don't even know if this enslavement actually even happened, but it is said to have happened, according to the book of the Exodus and whatnot. So if the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt at the time when Akhenaten was in power, then they would have been exposed to monotheism. The religion of the Israelites originally was polytheistic, but then Moses introduced, no, it was Abraham who introduced monotheism, right? So if the Israelites were actually indeed enslaved for some time in Egypt, and if they were exposed to Akhenaten's monotheism, then it's possible that perhaps it may kind of have influenced their belief system, theology, and maybe it would have had an influence on Judaism, which eventually became a monotheistic religion. It's possible, but we don't have conclusive evidence of that, but it's an intriguing possibility. But we don't even know for sure if this enslavement, this incarceration of the Israelites actually happened in Egypt, because thus far we have found absolutely not a single shred of evidence of the existence of Jewish people, Israelite people in Egypt during the pharaonic ages. Okay, next. Amisha says, how powerful was the Roman Empire? Well, it was pretty powerful. It was a pretty large empire. It controlled the entirety of the Mediterranean rim from the southern part of Europe, the Mediterranean portion of. Let's go to the map. Okay, so let's put the map on the screen. And if you look at the Mediterranean region, so all of Italy was obviously conquered, was part of Rome, but the Romans eventually conquered Hispania, Iberia, Spain, France, which was Gaul at the time, the Balkan region, obviously, Greece, obviously, Julius Caesar personally conquered Greece. Anatolia obviously used to be part of Greece. Judea, which is present day the Israel region, Syria was a Roman colony. Jordan, all of that. Egypt was part of Rome. Libya, yes, of course. Northern Africa, all of this was part of Rome. Yes, it was all part of the Roman Empire. If you look at Europe itself, all of France, it was then called Gaul, Cisalpine, Transalpine Gaul, all of that. That was part of the Roman Empire. Germania was part of Rome. Scythia, part of Scythia. Thrace was part of the Roman Empire. All of this, much of Europe was part of Rome, even the British Islands, not Ireland. The Romans never ventured to Ireland, but all the way to northern England, not Scotland, but yeah. So all of that. And they had vassals all over the place. And the Romans at various points in time fought the Persians. And the Roman Empire was actually once captured by the Persians and humiliated rather badly. So eventually the Romans were fighting our neighbors, the Persians, right? So obviously it's clear from just looking at the map, that it used to be a pretty powerful empire, pretty powerful. And it was in power for a very long period of time, multiple centuries. And once the Western Roman Empire, which was based out of Rome, it declined and fell and became part of it was totally destroyed by the Holy Roman Empire eventually. But the Eastern Roman Empire, based out of Byzantium or Constantinople, it remained a powerful empire until the Turks took over, 15 whatever, right? So the Eastern Roman Empire was in power for much longer, even after Rome fell, right? So Constantinople fell in 1453 to that guy, whatever his name was, the Turkish guy. So pretty powerful, no question about that. Nirvana Shanks says, which Indian maritime trade route had the biggest cultural impact beyond the subcontinent? Thank you for your attention to this question. So India had multiple trade routes. Let's once again go to map. Once again, we go to map and we'll try and trace out some of these trade routes that we had. India was, from the Rig Vedic days, a maritime civilization. So during, what we call the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history, we were trading with Mesopotamia. We know that because our seals from the Saraswati Sindhu region are found all across Mesopotamia. We had trading centers in the Gulf region. We were trading with Elam and Marhashi and Mesopotamia. So we had trade routes there. Then we were trading with Africa. We were trading with Egypt because we have found artifacts of our existence there. We were trading with Rome, and the Romans used to complain that that India was taking all of Rome's gold in exchange for spices. Then we were trading with Suvarna Bhumi, and that's about it. We are talking about maritime routes over here. So these are the major trade routes we had. Now, which had the biggest impact beyond the subcontinent? I would say the eastern trade route to Suvarna Bhumi. It had most likely the biggest impact because it completely Indianized this entire vast region. It's a huge region. It is larger than Jambudweep if you look at the entire geographical extent of the region. If you look at all the Indonesian islands, if you look at the Philippines, if you look at Suvarna Bhumi, Southeast Asia, which is Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam, all of that, huge area. All of that was completely Indianized, completely Hinduized, right? Through trade, only through trade, not through force or violence at all. So clearly, this was the biggest cultural impact we had. We also had, an impact, huge impact in Africa, but that is now diminished because of the passage of time and the decline of Indian civilization. All right. Shubhankar Kulkarni says, why did Indians eventually give up shipbuilding and traveling the oceans by the 16th or 17th century? We have records of Cholas going as far east as Vietnam and Cambodia, while Indian traders were present even in Africa and played a key role in, well, our trade with Rome. Yes. Is the Turkish occupation of India which started this inward? Is it the Turkish occupation of India that started this inward-looking mentality? Indians at one point in time had really good ships and were excellent navigators. You see, when Vasco da Gama went around the Cape of Good Hope and arrived in Eastern Africa, he thought at that time that he had the world's most powerful ships, the most advanced ships in the world. And when he reaches East Africa, I think Mombasa or somewhere, Kenya, Tanzania, that region, he sees ships that are 3 times the size of his ship. These are Indian ships. You have Indian merchants there. But these are peaceful ships without any weapons. So he takes the help of an Indian merchant. Apparently, we don't know who he was, but that's how he discovered India. That's how he was able to reach India. And that's where all the colonization nonsense starts. So India had tremendous shipbuilding, seafaring capabilities, and they were used for this was used for trade. And we had a huge presence in Africa, Eastern Africa, and also in Suvarnabhumi, all of that. Now, what happened? What happened is that we came under foreign occupation, first by the Turks and then by the Europeans. While the Turks were ruling India, they were not in control of all of India. They were in control of parts of India, and parts of India were still free. And those parts of India were still trading with other parts of the world, because we were a trading nation, a maritime nation. And our kings, our kingdoms, our empires encouraged trade. So it was part of our DNA. So we were doing this, and we had tremendous shipbuilding capabilities. Now, as the Turkic occupation spread like a cancer, the Turkic rulers had no interest in trade with other countries and facilitating Indian trade with other countries. They were extractors. They had other items on the agenda. So they discouraged trade. They conducted genocide, obviously, and they had no real interest in patronizing trade and helping that out. So that caused a slow decline in our trading activities. When the Europeans came to power and they took over parts of India, eventually the whole of India, they destroyed our trade. They de-industrialized India systematically. But they did keep some shipbuilding alive in India for their own purpose, for their own benefit. Lots of European ships were then built in India. Some of the ships that took part in the American War of Independence, American War of Independence, most likely, they were made in India. Some of the ships that participated in the US Civil War possibly were made in India, and so on. Yeah. So that was the thing. So because the Europeans, the British, systematically and purposefully, deliberately deindustrialized India, that's how all of this eventually disappeared. And today in India, people don't even know that we used to be a maritime civilization, the leading maritime civilization with the most advanced shipbuilding capabilities. Yeah, and today look at us. So, right. Okay, let's see a couple more questions. Yajna Valka says the book Exotic Aliens, The Lion and the Cheetah in India, written by Romila Thapar et al., seems to have tried to show that the lion was not native to India and was imported to India around the time of Alexander's invasions. Now, Marc de Manuel et al., The Evolutionary History of Extinct and Living Lions 2020, seems to have concluded that the lion existed in India from a very long time, much before the time of Alexander. So how could a supposed historian like Romila Thapar write an entire book to propagate a big lie? I'll tell you what. There are Indus Valley, Harappan, Saraswati Sindhu era seals and pottery that depict lions. Alexander was not born for a few thousand years after that. We had lions. We've always had lions. But why does somebody like Romila Thapar try to prove that there were no lions in India? And Alexander the Greek, he blessed us with lions. All good things come from outside, from the West, right? See, Romila Thapar is a very problematic, esteemed person. She has tried to distort a lot of things in the past. There is a Vedic text. It's called the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra. Let's Google it quickly to see some of her other achievements. Okay, let's go to Wikipedia and let's see if that what it says. Okay, Bodhayana Shrota Sutra. Let's go to Wikipedia and see what this has to say. It's a late Vedic text dealing with the solemn, etc., etc., etc. Blah 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 blah. Pauravas Urvashi legend. Translation controversy. So, according to Michael Witzel, some Vedic passages point to the Indo-Aryan migration. And Michael Witzel translated this passage of the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra to interpret it as evidence in favor of Aryan migration. Amavasu went east. Ayu went eastwards, and his people, the Kuru Panchal and the Kashi Videha, etc. This is the Aryan migration and so on. And Romila Thapar stated this passage contained literary evidence of an Aryan invasion. Now they've changed it to migration. It used to be invasion. If you look at the history of this article, it'll show invasion. So Romila Thapar used Michael Witzel's translation to say that there was an Aryan invasion. But this is an incorrect translation. This was a deliberately flawed translation. If you actually know Sanskrit, you will see that this text speaks of a westward migration towards Central Asia of Indians. Okay? So it's clear that these people have in the past, on multiple occasions, tried to distort Indian history. The Bodhayana Shrota Sutra talks about a Vedic king, late Vedic king called Amavasu, who migrates westwards. His people are the Gandhara, the Parshva, and the Aratha. Gandhara obviously is Afghanistan, Parshva means Persia. Aratha could be Armenia. So that could show our connection with these regions. Persia and Afghanistan, we anyway know our connection, but possibly Armenia. So Michael Witzel did a incorrect translation, and Romila Thapar took that and tried to propagate the Aryan invasion theory. It's been completely debunked today. Nobody believes that Michael Witzel translation. Anyone who knows Sanskrit will tell you that it's a westward migration, not an eastward migration. So Romila Thapar has in the past done these things. She has a track record of doing this. So what can I say? It's no surprise that she has tried to claim that the lion was brought into India by a Westerner, because we had no good things in India. Yeah. Okay, I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to end it here. So let's take some questions from the comments. If you have some live questions you would like to ask me about history, ask me. And I will not take other questions. I'll only take. Yes, you're right, sir. Aryan picnic theory. It used to be the Aryan invasion theory. They were able to find no evidence of invasion. So they said, no, it was not invasion. It was migration. They came peacefully and migrated. So then where's the evidence of the migration? Then they said, no, it was multiple small waves of migration. So that also has not worked. Where are the multiple small waves of migration? Show me the archaeological evidence. Show me one shred of evidence of small waves of migration. That's not there. So they'll say it was not migration, it was tourism. They came as tourists. Even that won't work. So they'll now say picnic. So Aryan invasion theory has become Aryan migration theory. Then migration theory will become tourism theory, and then eventually it will become a picnic theory. And then they'll say alien invasion theory. None of these is going to work. There was no Aryan invasion migration whatsoever. We are the Arya people. If there were Aryan invasions or migrations, they were out of India, and that's the end of the story. I don't care what goddamn genetic evidence you put in front of me. The crux of the matter is Hinduism and Sanskrit, not genetics. A huge place like India, obviously we had migrants coming all the time. It proves nothing whatsoever. Okay, questions about history, please, not about civic sense and God knows what. Okay, Sri Ramachandra Nama says, why did World War II happen quickly after World War I? Well, it's the same conflict. I call it the European tribal wars. It's the same conflict. The end of the First World War was humiliation for Germany. The Treaty of Versailles was humiliation for Germany, and that caused that created the conditions for the rise of a German backlash, because Germany was humiliated. Germany's pride was destroyed. Eventually, somebody would try and reclaim that pride, right? So Germany was made to pay huge reparations. Germany was made to give up territory. All kinds of humiliations, right? All kinds of humiliating conditions in Germany. So then you have in 1935 the rise of a painter who says, "I will restore German pride." Then unfinished business has to be taken care of. So that is the reason. You see, it all starts with the crisis of 1914 and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was dismantled entirely, and then it all ends with, well, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay. Geopolitical Dubai says, how advanced were Indian metallurgical techniques compared to civilizations like Egypt or Mesopotamia? Well, you see, we have certain pillars in India. You go to Delhi, there's a pillar standing there, right? Those pillars have been standing for centuries in the weather. Iron pillars, not steel, iron pillars. They've been standing in the weather, in the Indian monsoon, the sun, the heat, the rain, the snow, whatever is there. No deterioration whatsoever. Till today, engineers and scientists can't tell you how that sort of that iron was created. How was that iron smelted? What was the technique behind it? Nope, we don't know. The world's greatest and best steel, the best steel of all, was crucible steel. It was being smelted in India, in southern India, even in Sri Lanka, present day Sri Lanka, around 500 BC. When Alexander the Greek came to India, he discovered this. It was like the greatest thing he had ever seen. It has been given various names: crucible steel, ceric steel. Now it is called Damascus steel. It's Indian steel. So our metallurgical techniques were beyond anything the West or any other part of the world could achieve. Tremendous. Okay. Dark Edit says, okay, this is the last question for today. Last question. Were the Kushans Indians or Central Asians? Everywhere I saw, they say they're Central Asian invaders. Of course they will say that. Of course they will say they are foreigners. The foreigners. See, the Kushans, they came from which part of the world? They invaded India, yes, agree. No questions. No question. They came from which part of the world? Let's go to the map. Let's put the map on the screen. So the Kushans, they came from the Tarim Basin region, present day Xinjiang, currently occupied by China. What is this river? This is the Khotan River. There's a Tarim River somewhere here. What is this? Tarim River. Where is Tarim River? It's somewhere in this region, okay? So the Tarim Basin region is somewhere around here. Khotan and all that. The Kushans came from this region. They came. So if you look at this region, this was the region that was home to the Tushara people of the Mahabharata. In English, you call them the Tokharians. The Tokharians. And if you look at the Tarim region today, you will find mummies there. People who were buried around 3000 BC. The Tarim Basin mummies. These were the Tokharian people. They spoke the Tokharian language. And if you look at the Tokharian script, it goes ka, kha, ga, ga, yara, la, vasha, all that. So it was an Indic kind of language. It was based on an Indic system. If you look at the DNA of the Tarim Basin mummies, male DNA, it is R1A1A. It is classic Indian DNA, even though these people have blue eyes, possibly red hair and white skin. So they were the Tushara people, Mlecha people, but related to Indians. You could say that they were the easternmost Scythians, the Kushans, not really Central Asians. So, and the Scythians were people who, in a very distant time in history, migrated out of India, possibly as a consequence of a defeat in a battle, in a war, maybe the Battle of the Ten Kings. So the Scythians and the Kushans were always related to us. If you look at the Tarim Basin cities, which are still found in ruin form in the deserts, you will see frescoes and paintings of Lord Ganesh, Lord Shiva, all that. So they were culturally Indian, linguistically possibly different, ethnically they had similar DNA. R1A is the classic Indian genetic haplogroup, male patrilineal haplogroup. So they were related to Indians. They must have been outside of India for several thousand years, but they were related to us. And when they invaded India and conquered parts of India, they were able to assimilate harmoniously, like sugar in milk. There were no ethnic clashes, no religious tensions, nothing. Same for the Scythians. So yes, they came from Central Asia, but they were culturally, ethnically, civilizationally very similar to us. And the Kushan Empire did more than I cannot think of anybody else, did more than anyone I can think of to further propagate Indian culture and civilization far beyond India's boundaries. I mean, how much more Indian do you want somebody to be? Yeah. Okay, they came from outside. I don't care. They came from what part of the world? They were civilizationally like far more Indian than many Indians today. Understand that. So that's what I would say, and so on. Okay, I'm going to end this today. So thank you so much. We've gone way past two hours, so better end it now. Thank you so much for all the questions. I had more questions that I had selected, but I ran out of time. When I do a history live stream, it's always like this. So many very interesting questions. So how about we do one history live stream a week? And we can make the other one a geopolitics live stream. I can make it a super chat live stream, that sort of thing. I think it'll be very interesting. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you so much for the questions. I will see you in tomorrow's geopolitics live stream. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and don't forget to keep raising your standards. Thank you so much. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night. Good day. Bye bye.